It's my native language. It's my mother tongue, as one of my friends calls it. And it's a place where it's messy, like any family is messy. It's absolutely my personal spiritual path. I belong here just as much as the conservative evangelical.
Your dreams will always require your healing, and you need to know that in order to move forward. If you feel stuck in your creativity, your art, your business, or your life, then it's essential to understand that you are being asked to heal what's in the way of you creating what you dream about. This podcast is all about the relationship between your emotional health and your creativity. I'm Courtney Lancaster, and this is the Heal Create podcast.
Welcome to another episode of the Heal Create podcast. I am Courtney, and I have my occasional co-host, Emily.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
Good morning. Well, it's not morning for you. I'm in California. You're in Florida. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday.
And happy summer. We are talking about something that keeps coming up, and it's this topic of Christian faith deconstruction. And the reason why we're talking about this is actually the more that I go on building this business and supporting creatives, the more that I find that the people that kind of find their way to me come from Christianity, probably because I have a huge, my entire life has been in the Christian context in all of its many forms. And I've been a worship leader for 20 years. And so a lot of the people that find their way to me also share that context. And also happen to be maybe wrestling with their faith or maybe reconstructing their faith. Yeah. And I think that there is a really big, I know and I find over and over and over again that there's a really big connection for Christian creatives or between Christian creatives and deconstructing your faith. And I know it's like a movement now. It's like a whole thing and everybody has their reasons. I also think it's really fascinating. Have you heard the idea that like every 500 years, Christianity sort of, there's like a reformation, kind of reinvents itself?
Yeah, I remember you telling me that, I think during our sessions together still in Reading, like pretty early on. And I was like, this makes me feel a lot better about some of the things that I'm noticing come up. But it's so intriguing to me. And it does really feel like that, I think, from my perspective. I'm sure from yours too, that we're kind of going through a big change in the way that people engage with faith. Because I can say, like, even with my clients, like everyone brings this up and is having questions. And I think it's just...
Really? With you too?
Yeah, it's not necessarily like the topic that we're focusing on. It's just a part of it. It always comes up.
Yeah. Well, and healthy spiritual practices are really important for a healthy nervous system. What I mean by that is having an internal sense of connection to something greater, a force of love outside of you, is actually something that naturally happens for kids that feel very attuned to and feel very grounded and protected by their parents growing up, and their parents were emotionally healthy. Those types of kids, which I don't know really anybody that has had that fullness experience in their childhood. But what we know from the science and the research is that kids that did grow up in really emotionally healthy environments with a mom and a dad, with two parents, I should say, that are, emotionally healthy, grow up to have this internal sense of deep, deep connection and protection. And so what happens is, in order to regulate your nervous system or go through hard things or find resilience or feel really deeply like to trust that everything's working out, that you're safe, that you're provided for, that is a really important, those are really great resources. Well, they're essential resources to have in order for you to move through life and be your authentic self. So that would be spirituality, because it's not anything that you can measure or see necessarily, this connection to something greater. And that's why, in Christianity, we call it faith. I mean, a lot of religions call it faith, but it's a faith and a faith practice. We practice this feeling. So for most of us, we did not have that sense of internal safety and connection. And we end up finding it through religion. And that's not a bad thing. That can be a really beautiful thing. Anyone that had unresolved trauma in their childhood, what trauma does is it takes from you, especially in your 0 to 12, it takes from you your authentic identity, or your connection to your authentic identity, because your authenticity can never be taken away, but your connection to it can. And it takes away your internal sense of safety and your internal sense of belonging. And so what's really interesting, and what I studied for a while when I was in ministry school while I was deconstructing my own faith, was the connection between unresolved trauma and evangelicalism specifically, because evangelicalism is a very, very clear, black and white path. It gives you immediately a purpose. With the Great Commission, it gives you a sense of identity in who you are. And not all of this is good or bad. It just is. And it gives you a sense of belonging. It is contingent upon you agreeing with a lot of pillars of evangelicalism. But if you do, you belong, you're in. To evangelize is to pull someone to your side, which means that there are sides, which means that there's an us and a them, which is what a kid needs to feel really safe. So traumatized people often are magnetized to evangelicalism because it's so clear in its sense of belonging and identity and purpose. And it's one of the reasons why people that end up going through healing experiences, or they begin healing their emotional health, end up kind of asking these big questions about what they're experiencing in church and what they're hearing in church. And I honestly would have thought that it was like maybe just me and a couple of friends. And I now realize like there's way too many of us to not just start saying, just normalizing it.
Totally.
And offering hope and just connection through it. Because I remember for me, I know I'll talk a little bit about my story, and then we can kind of go into, I'd love to hear your story, and then we can talk about some reconstruction. But so for me, I had a lot of unresolved trauma from my childhood, and a lot of things that I had no idea about, no idea were even there until, probably everybody here knows my story. We can link that podcast in the notes if you don't. But when I was 33, I started having panic attacks out of nowhere. And for me, it just turned out to be a lot of pain that I had never processed. Emotional health wasn't, normalized or talked about in my childhood. My only context for all of it was spiritual warfare. So everybody just kept, praying the demons off of me. And I was a worship leader at the time. So I just really doubled down on worship leading. I really thought, okay, the enemy's going to steal my destiny. I'm just going to steal it back. And I remember raging against the darkness, and then feeling it flood back to me, and just thinking I'm in this life or death wrestle with
it's so hard,
an enemy. And in hindsight, I feel a lot of things. I feel really sad that nobody explained to me what was actually going on. I was in a wrestle with my own nervous system trying to protect me, and that you're not going to win that.
No, it sounds so exhausting.
Oh my gosh. I was so exhausted. So that was 2015. So for a few years, I was just in this exhausting battle. And a worship leader getting a lot of opportunities got me, we moved to be a part of Bethel Church, which is a big ministry in Northern California. They talk about belonging and identity. That's their whole thing. Is in the intro video to the whole program at Bethel, it's like, you have a job and you have a mission, and will you say yes? And will you join us? I mean, everything that a traumatized, lonely kid wants to hear. Yes. You mean I matter? You mean you'll accept me? You mean I belong? And it just feels so good in certain parts. But I remember in first year, and the first year that I was there was a famous, very, very famous world famous worship leader that was speaking to our worship team. He basically said, for anybody that becomes a Christian, they need to immediately know two things. The first thing is that you're in a war. Hey, welcome, you're in a war. The second thing is you're not as great as you think you are.
Oh, so encouraging.
Yeah, yeah. And obviously he had his reasons for saying this. Like, you know, if you really believe that's the context, like, yeah, that he really did believe that was the truth, and that's the context that every Christian should stand on, throw off every hindrance, whatever. So when I was going through trauma therapy, especially in my second year there, I remember learning exactly the opposite through understanding what makes a healthy human. And it's these two pillars of understanding that everyone's okay. We're all okay. And you are so much more loved than you think you are. And those two kind of pillars were in direct opposition to the context that I was given. And my whole entire life, I feel like I've been preparing for battle, whether, you know, if you're really heavily into literal evangelicalism, you know, Jesus coming back and any moment now. And, you know, people need to be saved. And it's like Satan is coming after you, coming after our kids, coming after our families. Like it is so intense what we've been given for kids that grew up. I mean, your 0 to 12 programming is your most powerful subconscious programming. It affects everything unless you're able to change it, which we are, but there's a lot of intentionality there. And combined with all of those really, imperatives of evangelicalism is this constant training of not being led astray. So it's kind of like if anybody tells you different, they're lost.
Yeah.
So they're lost and you're going to be lost if you follow them. What is crazy to me, Emily, is when I begin to really step back from my faith, meeting people who weren't in Christianity and like getting to know them and talking to them, thought this was insane. Like this is crazy Netflix documentary stuff. And I'm like, what do you mean? Like this was my whole life. Not only was this my whole life, I'm constantly surrounded by people who also this is their whole life. So then it becomes this like club of like the whole world doesn't know they're lost and we are the only ones that can save them. And it's like, even as I say it, I'm like, oh gosh, no wonder we're all.
Yeah. There's just so much there.
Yeah.
Yeah. You could unpack everything you just said, like one by one about how unhelpful and damaging it can be. I don't like saying, you know, something is bad, but right. That kind of belief system over your whole life is pretty damaging, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah, it really is. And it becomes a really scary journey to question when I think when you are a Christian creative specifically, because creatives have big imaginations, wild imaginations. They're highly sensitive to everything, but to feeling like they don't belong, to how people are receiving them. I mean, everything that makes them an excellent creative is also the thing that makes emotional healing or questioning your faith or your family system terrifying. And I had no idea what to stand on or what I believed in. And so we took a step back from church for a long time and just like I really was studying obsessed with like, wait, what the hell? Like I was like really studying like my own belief systems. Where did they actually come from? I mean, evangelicalism is such a new, in the grand scheme of, you know, what we know of as far as like connection to God and spirituality, it's like a new religion. It's like, yes. And very westernized. And I think it was really interesting to talk to my friends who felt a really deep, profound connection to God and even Jesus, but didn't grow up in Christianity and didn't have all of this baggage and just was like, what? And so that was just really, really difficult and really, really scary. And when I talk to people now who are like, sobbing because they're saying, I don't even know what I believe in and I'm terrified. I just completely understand. It gets so much better. And that actually doesn't have anything to do with the love of God for you or your connection to God. That has way more to do with what you've been told about God. It's really hard
so good
to change your beliefs. It's really hard to change the beliefs that your parents gave you. Or, you know, for me, that was my whole entire childhood context. Really, really hard to do that. So I'll stop there. That was like sort of the thread. Those are the threads that unraveled the sweater. But this is coming from me who grew up from literal Sunday school, like nursery school, baby in very conservative Christianity, and then unraveling it at the age of 36, 37. So it's 36 or 7 years of my life. But for you, it was a different story. And I meet people like this as well, where you didn't grow up in Christianity, right? What was your journey into Christianity like?
So when I was a kid, my parents did take me to church, even though they didn't go, because my auntie and uncle and cousins, and we lived in a small town, and most of the people that we kind of knew went to this church. So they gave me the chance to go and to experience it and to see if I wanted to have faith. And I went until I think my early teenage years. So it's a decent amount of time, but I don't think I ever really felt like I belonged there because my parents didn't go. So there was like the group of kids that had their whole family like in the church, and we didn't necessarily do all like the extra things and hang out with them. And so I kind of got to a point where I was like, this just doesn't feel fun, and I don't know if I want to go anymore. This was probably after I like prayed the prayer and like gave my life to Jesus, and that happened maybe when I was like 10 or 11. But I didn't really understand like what faith was or what it could look like. And then I started getting curious when I was in my first year of university. So I was 19, 20, and I just bought myself a Bible and like read the whole thing and just like kind of just dived straight in, and it felt really, really good. Wow. I don't know if
you read the whole Bible?
Have watched. Yeah, I like devoured this thing.
Wow.
Like I was like
that's kind of
so
precious.
Curious. It was so precious looking back. Like I was gonna say about the Russell Brand videos, I don't necessarily have like an opinion on him, but I have just been really enjoying seeing his like wonder and curiosity and his excitement about faith and the way that he's sharing. And that's how it felt for me at the beginning, because I think it was nice that I was old enough to really know those feelings, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does.
And I got to make my own choice. But yeah, in diving in really intensely, I got super connected in church into everything, and then obviously moved to Bethel as well. That's where we met. And
what drew you to Bethel?
I had a friend that went there, and I visited, and I was ending university, and I honestly was like, I don't really want to go into working life right now. I feel like I still want to just
explore.
I don't know, have fun, explore. And I really loved it at Bethel. When I visited, it was like, so, I don't know, just this like other experience that I think a lot of people enjoy being a part of. I think the belonging thing felt really good. Like I really felt like I belonged there at the beginning. It felt so good to feel at home and to be valued. The way that they talk about. So I think that is what really drew me. And I think I was curious about going into ministry and kind of doing that with my life. I don't know if I was like really thinking about that intensely at the time, but yeah, after being at Bethel, which I think this is an experience for a lot of people, they go into that environment and then all of their emotions start coming up because it's just so intense. And also like the kindness of God too. I think you are in the presence of God if you like believe that. That's what I believe. So you're going into a space of like love,
concentrated
kindness.
Yeah.
Yes, it's like
all about
you are
that.
just in this, I don't know. It
Yeah.
just feels super intense in a really beautiful way. But I just cried 24/7. Like I just every day, and not the type of crying that's like good crying. It was like a lot of pain coming up and I didn't know what to do.
Yeah.
And so Sarah connected us.
Mm-hmm.
She was my third year.
Mm-hmm.
And then I started working
Mutual
with you
friend.
like just after the first year. And then that's when my whole questioning began. And it was pretty intense on times. But I think for me, I don't know if I was studying it as much as you did.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely like loved drawing from you and just hearing your perspective, and that was great. But there was something about like identifying as like I'm deconstructing that felt really scary. So, and I also didn't want to be part of that like group that you see that is kind of hating on everything.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't feel productive for me to necessarily attach myself to this group of people or this identity. I just allowed myself to be curious and ask questions and take it really slowly. I wasn't really taking in a lot of other information either.
Right.
I just dialed it back down and just really connected with what I was thinking and my ideas, which felt really good because I'd spent so much time creating my like faith identity or beliefs around what everybody else was thinking, and I actually didn't let myself question and think like, wait, what do I think? I remember you said to me like, Jesus asked Peter, who do you say I am? Like, it's not anyone else. It doesn't matter really what anyone else says, but you get to go on that journey too.
Yes.
And I think there's like a big journey with growing up. When you think about a healthy attachment to a parent, there's a point with your child that you will like say, it's time for you to like go and figure this out. Like, I can't tell you everything anymore.
Yeah.
And you don't necessarily need me to make all these decisions and like to do these things. Like, you need to be able to do that yourself. And I felt like in my journey with God, that was where I was at, where God was just really trusting me to say like, well, you can like mature and kind of grow into who you are and who I've made you to be without needing me to like tell you everything. And to, I don't know, kind of have this interesting, more codependent, I would say, relationship instead of like a healthy attunement and attachment. So that's kind of how I framed it in my mind.
Yeah.
But it was definitely hard and felt intense. But there were big moments of peace as well. And now kind of on this side, I feel, oh my goodness, so much more connected to God than I ever was, because it's actually so real. And I think that's like what's waiting for people on the other side. It's not disconnection. No. It's actually even more connection, more access to love, more, I don't know, just knowing like you're okay. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to like, feels very peaceful to me. My connection with God feels so life-giving. Yeah. Whereas it didn't necessarily feel that way before. I felt I had to do all these things. I had to be good. I had to always be growing and learning and like becoming this exceptional Christian person. And it feels really good to not have that pressure on me anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
To be like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think like, you know, you talked about getting into this environment in ministry school. I think that that's more universal even than Bethel, like for people that do YWAM or go work for a church or go on a mission trip, and like where you're like, you have this feeling of like, this is it, like, which, you know, from a traumatized perspective, that is a very addicting, magnetic feeling of like, totally. This is, I found it. I found the thing. I mean, I remember watching like the YouTube videos of Bethel worship team and being like, I found it. Like, this is totally, this is exactly what I've been waiting my whole life to feel, like a purpose, belonging, passion, identity, all of the things. And so then I wonder, I have wondered this a lot, if like that is actually God's design to like or I should say, I wonder if we could look at it differently, because so many of the people that I met are like, I was totally disillusioned as soon as I gave my life to ministry, or I like became a Christian. I just like, there was a point where I just became totally disillusioned. And I'm like, yeah, who wants to be illusioned? Who wants to be like under the illusion of, whatever this is? Like, I think that's actually okay. And not, I think, I know, because I think that deconstruction is the revival that everyone's praying for. It doesn't look anything like what I think a lot of people think that it's supposed to.
Yeah. Yeah.
A lot of, like, I would say high up, very evangelical leaders, but I think like us learning how to connect to an inner sense of safety and how to connect to Jesus and God, like for ourselves, is what the gospel is all about. It's what God wants for his kids, to feel so deeply connected, and not because they're following somebody else's idea of who God is. But it can feel when you are disillusioned and you're like, I don't know if I want to follow all this anymore. It can feel like I always think about those movies when like they're in space and they get disconnected from the ship and they're just like floating, and they could just float forever until they die. That's how it feels. Completely untethered. But that's when you sort of have to use your like, okay, like now this is when we get to practice and strengthen that muscle of being really connected to ourself. We get to strengthen that muscle of feeling like really like listening to like, how does truth feel in my body? How do I know the voice of God for myself? And I think we talk about maybe in church that being the goal. I do not think that we teach people actually how to live that way, which is how Jesus lived. I mean, Jesus was like, when people are like, this is, and I've had people in my life, because I was in church my whole life, say like, the Bible is how you hear the voice of God. That's been told to me all the time. Like, because I'll always say like, I just really feel like I know God said this to me, or I really feel connected to this idea, or like Jesus has been speaking, whatever, like thing that I'm like really trusting internally, and just like, well, I mean, but that's not scriptural, or that's not. And I'm like, that is what they told Jesus.
Yeah.
That's what they told Jesus all the time. He was like, man does not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God. The mouth of God, to me, is not the Bible.
Yeah, which that might be pretty controversial to some people.
I think it is. And I think like but my relationship to God, I don't want my kids to read about me. I want them to talk to me. But the Bible is wonderful for understanding who God is, and the history of his people, and the life of Jesus. I mean, even like the accuracy of the actual meaning of the Bible is like one of the most accurate books that we have. And like our, if you look at some of the other oldest like actual books that were written, like the accuracy has remained intact. Like it is such a powerful resource for Christians. But I talk to God. I like, I have a relationship with God. I mean, and Christ in me, the hope of glory. And what did Jesus say? Like the connection, I am the way, the connection that I have to God is the connection that is available to you. I'm the first among many brothers and sisters, meaning you have the same connection to God that I do. And
I love that.
So I think like it is controversial to very religious people. And that's okay with me. Because I know enough now to know that there's people all over the spectrum. And I think that what you said too about there's a whole group of people that are in the like, I'm very angry about it all. Like deconstruction, I think, has become synonymous with a very like maybe atheist viewpoint or like a post-Christian viewpoint. And that to me, when I think there was a season, like Richard Ward talks about, like you have to go through the angry stage, but you just don't want to stay there.
Yeah.
And so the cynicism, the skepticism, like all felt so toxic to my own system. And it wasn't a place where I wanted to stay.
Yeah.
What was your experience like with that? Did you go through the angry stage?
Yeah, I did. And I think I still on times feel angry about maybe like a message that I hear that is, I believe is like maybe sharing a message that is a little bit unhelpful, like isn't really sharing the love and acceptance and, you know, all the wonderful things, and it maybe carries a little bit more shame. I still do have moments of anger, but I don't stay there. Like I'm able to be with myself in that. I really wanted to resist the idea that deconstruction is bad. And a lot of messages are out there about deconstruction. I feel like a lot of people talk about it, like leaders, and more often than not, the messages I've heard are really like, this isn't good, this is scary, like this is going to lead you down a terrible path, you like can't trust this, and you know, this is what happens to these kind of people. And I think like they were portraying that angry stereotype in those messages. And so I really was like, this can't be true. This can't be what this is. So I think I wanted to create something for myself that felt really supportive and wasn't like unfolding in the way that maybe people are scared it will or are told it will. So yeah, it felt really important to me to like reclaim that and be like, no, this is safe. It's okay to ask questions. God isn't afraid of my questions. And it doesn't change anything. Like there's nothing that can separate you from love. That means there's no questions, there's no doubt or just anything that we tend to avoid. None of that can separate you. So that's what I tried to really anchor to over and over again.
Same. I remember just thinking about that verse when I was asking just the biggest questions. And when I was really like resisting some of the things that I was being told, I just kept thinking like, okay, I can never be separated. I can never be plucked from the hand of God. Ever. And the only people that Jesus got mad at were the ones that told other people how to be close to God.
Yeah, I think we forget that so much. I know. Like Jesus was actually radical. Like people hated him enough to kill him. Like I know it's like the whole story of revealing God's love to us and just the message that like love can never die and just this eternal connection to life. But it's really interesting to remember like, oh, Jesus was actually like not liked.
Right.
And people were afraid of his radical ideas about you can hear the voice of God, like the kingdom of heaven is here, and we're not going to worship God in temples, we'll worship in spirit and truth. And it's like, wait, what? You don't have to do all these things? And you know, kind of just switching it up like so extremely. So yeah, I think it's helpful to remember that, like, oh, maybe Jesus like really went through this as well. Like it's not a separated experience, and maybe it's part of the healthy journey of faith and understanding yourself.
Yeah, I think it is the journey. I remember somebody at Bethel telling me that one time when I was in my first year. I was just beside myself with anxiety and existential crisis, and I was a worship leader, and I was like, well, and I remember talking to one of the leaders there. Is it Mark? Is that his name? Mark Brooks? And I was kind of telling him all of this stuff because I just didn't know what was going on with me. And he said, yeah, I think that was Jesus's journey too. I remember my mind like, what?
Yeah.
Yeah, like that's absolutely true. And the good news, I think, is that it's not either full cooperation with your religious system or angry outskirts, skepticism.
Yeah.
I hate this. I mean, what is fear really? Like when you meet when you have fear, or even when you're talking to people that have fear about your journey, fear comes from self-protection. So I've noticed that when I'm talking to somebody who I can tell is genuinely like I'm bumping up against their nervous system just by me talking about this stuff, then I know it's not like a curious open space where they want to understand me. And it's like this thing, like, beautiful conversation, because I want to know the truth. I'm like completely open to being wrong about anything. I want to know. And I know that because I used to be one of these people, when I talk to people who are very, very nervous for me, I'm not talking to their authentic self, because the authentic self has nothing to defend, nothing to protect, nothing to hide, nothing to prove. And so I've and I don't know if you can also speak to this, but I think I've become really discerning about who I talk to about this stuff.
Yeah.
And then it's always interesting when I talk to somebody who's like totally doesn't have this context at all. And they're like, wait, what's the big deal? Wait, what? I'm like, oh yeah, this is a very like cultural fear that we have. I think for me, reconstruction, when I went through a lot of the chaos of figuring out like, gosh, what is all this? Like, what was I raised in? Oh my gosh. And like really questioning everything. I remember listening to a podcast with a world religions professor, and he was saying, the host asked him, do you pray? And the world religions professor, I think it was the world religions professor at Harvard, he was like, yeah, in the morning I pray the Jewish prayers, and then at noon I pray the Muslim prayers, and then at night I pray the Psalm of David. He's like, but I wouldn't recommend that to anyone. He said, pick one spiritual perspective and go deep into it. And I don't know why, but that for me felt like, oh, like there was something about being outside of Christianity. There was something about deconstructing, and maybe talking to a lot of other people that were deconstructing, where I felt like, I don't know if I can ever go back. And I don't know, there's something about that that helped me realize, like, wait a second, there is no, like, I think I was still, the little kid in me was still looking for like the better spiritual perspective, or the more healthy path, or like something different, and like just really confused about where do I belong. And I just realized I have had experiences with Jesus. I've had experiences and encounters with Jesus, the Holy Spirit, the presence of God, and I daily work through things and talk and laugh. I mean, I have a relationship with love, with God. And Christianity is it's my home. It's my hometown. It's my native language. It's my mother tongue, as one of my friends calls it. And it's a place where it's messy, like any family is messy. It's absolutely my personal spiritual path. And I belong here just as much as the conservative evangelical. Yeah, and I remember coming back to church after a couple of years. Somebody invited me to church because they had a friend that was speaking. It was like, oh, you should come check this out. And it was a different church that I didn't go to. And I remember sitting there and it's really weird to be back in church when you have left for a long time. And I just felt like my defenses were up, and I was like, oh, I don't know about that. And they sang that song, Lean Back. It's an Amanda Cook song. And at the end they said, I thought I knew what love was. I thought I knew what love was, but it's better. It's better. And I sobbed. I don't think I've ever cried harder in church in my life. Aww. In this like church that I didn't even go to. And I just realized like everything that I had gone through was God leading me to something so much better. A true, genuine connection with God, where I'm not searching through the Bible for an answer, but I have a direct line of communication through the Holy Spirit, through God, every day for the rest of my life. And I just realized, oh gosh, this is my home. Some people don't want me to be here, but that happens in families too sometimes. And it doesn't take away my belonging. And so that is something that I just felt like was so private and so personal to me. But the more that I talk to people, the more that I realize like, oh, this is like a real thing that's happening. And from there, from that point, it was 2021, I think, I felt like I wanted, like my husband and I are just kind of like, where do we go now? What happens? Mm-hmm. And we probably, when we moved to Orange County, we probably tried like 10 different churches at least. And there were like some non-negotiables that we had, but we also had a lot of like grace, like, hey, no place is going to be perfect, but we felt really compelled by the idea of church, really compelled by the idea of like belonging to a community that gathers every week to sing about love, which singing in a group is so regulating for your nervous system. And as a worship leader, it's where I began to really experience my first connections to God. And so there's just this through line. And now I'm like starting to lead worship there. We have the people that we've found, you know, we're not secretive about what we believe, and we're not judgmental about what anyone else believes. And it's been like a very healing, wonderful experience that I think for anyone that feels like they don't want to throw out the whole faith concept, they don't want to throw out Christianity, like it is so possible. I think that there are increasingly more spaces that allow for people that maybe are seeing things differently but still want to belong.
Yeah, I love that you touch on that belonging, because I think that's really the thing that people are so afraid to lose when they start asking questions like, will I be accepted? Will I be able to show up in this space again? And I also love that you said, like, there are some people that maybe don't want me to be here. And that can be true, but you can still be there. Like, there is still room for you, and no one can kick you out. Like, no one can take those experiences away from you. And I just love that so much.
Yeah.
Just to know, if you are just starting to go through this journey and you're asking some questions and you're feeling really afraid, like, to know, okay, there's this possibility that I will still belong, and I will still be able to have this relationship that I want with God, and to belong to a community, and there's places out there that will accept me and love me for where I'm at. It's just like so hopeful, and it takes away just a little bit of the shame maybe, and the fear and the hesitation to really like face what's going on inside of yourself. And I just feel so good for even me to hear that and to hear about your journey.
Thanks for saying that. I think it's especially important for creatives. Well, it's important for everyone to feel like they have a connection to love outside of them, a connection that comes, you know, from an internal place, and a connection to an external force of love working in their lives. That's really essential for creativity, for anyone, but for creatives especially, it's essential. And for Christian creatives, I have found an experience that can be the most tumultuous journey of really making your faith your own, but the most rewarding. You know, like there are a lot of people that I know that don't identify as creative. They don't identify as like super high sensitivity, emotional, and like it's just not as big of a deal to them. Like they can just be like, you know, like it's just more casual, like, I go to church and I love God, and their gifts and passions are in other directions, but they feel connected to God, and it's not that big of a deal. Creatives are the ones that it's this huge swirly, oh my gosh, tornado of a deal. And I think like it's important to know how loved you are, to be able to put your big ideas out into the world, and to know how much you belong. But to belong to yourself first, and to know how deeply you belong to God is the foundation of your dreams coming true. Because that's authenticity. And when you're in your authentic self, healthy people naturally want to create beautiful things. And then those beautiful things that healthy people create inspire other people to heal and create as well. I had somebody ask me, and that goes to my church, like, how in the world does someone like you like come back to church and find yourself like in this church? It's like a little church. And they, you know, that it's still a Christian church. It's still like there's things all the time that kind of like they bump me or they're just like not for me. And I just kind of like let them float by, messages and stuff. And they're like, how do you do it? And I'm like, when you don't need the church to be anything for you, it's way easier to belong. And that's what I think happens when you resolve trauma. Because when you have unresolved trauma, a lot of people come to church because they need it to provide identity and belonging. But when you have your sense of identity, which you can recover, hasn't gone anywhere since the day you were born, you can recover and connect to, and you have a sense of deep belonging to yourself and God, then you can easily be a part of a church. You can learn from literally anyone. Then you get to choose, where do I want to be? And how do I want to serve these people and walk and do life with these people? And that's just a completely different and so much more expansive.
Yeah. And it's like when you have that internal sense of safety that nothing can take away from you because you've cultivated it. So if there's like a message that you don't agree with, you're not like, uh-oh, am I bad? Am I thinking this wrong? Like, this is terrible.
Rocked.
You still feel safe. Like maybe there's a little pang of like, oh, okay, yeah, maybe I feel a little bit triggered, but you can come back to that space of like, oh, someone can totally disagree with me and I'm safe. Like that is just priceless. Like no one can take that. And I think that's where the healing journey and like the faith deconstruction really goes together, because you are recreating this nervous system that isn't afraid of other people thinking differently. It's not in that black and white space. You're not feeling anxious when you're going into these environments in the same way. It's okay if you feel that. I felt that. But on this other side, I'm like, oh, I can be safe. Like someone can think totally different than me and I can be sat in this chair and be with myself. Yeah. Yeah. It sounds like you have that experience.
That's exactly right.
At church.
Yeah. Yeah, I do. And I will say, I don't know if you can relate to this, but there are people who have gone on very similar journeys to me and have found that they have found belonging and connection and community outside of church. And I also think that that's beautiful and totally okay and great. So it's for anybody that feels like they are just in the middle of this world, just know that the fear and the shame is not God. God doesn't speak in fear and shame. And that connection and belonging are yours. You are a child of His, and you are so loved, and you absolutely belong. And the more that you are able to retrain your body and to heal what doesn't feel like it belongs, and you're able to really practice this embodied sense of belonging and connection, the easier and easier it is to create the things that light you up, that you are so excited about, which I also feel like are directly like seeds planted in you from God Himself. So
no, I think you said that beautifully.
Well, thank you guys for listening. And if you have any thoughts or questions, go ahead and reach out to me. You can find me at heal.create on Instagram, or at Courtneyland, which is more of my personal journey. Go ahead and leave a review on this podcast if anything resonates with you. And so grateful you're here. Have a great day, guys. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Heal Create podcast. If you have enjoyed this podcast at all, we would love if you would subscribe, rate it, send it to your friends. That would really help us get this message out, this message of empowering people towards emotionally sustainable creativity. Also, we have a PDF for you. So there's an exercise that I created called inspiration mirroring. And basically, it is for those that are looking to get acquainted with their authentic, truest self, based on the idea that whatever inspires you embodies your potential. And so if you want to get started on that journey today of really understanding who you are at your core, the person that you hope you are, then you can go to the link in my bio on Instagram or go to my website and download that PDF. I think that's all. Have a beautiful day.